Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the National Building Museum. My name is Scott Kratz and I'm the Vice President for Education here at the museum. And tonight's program is the third in a brand new series called For the Greener Good, Conversations That Can Change the World. The goal of this series is to bring together the nation's leading experts to discuss sustainability and the built environment. The programs will track how we've arrived at our present situation, the anticipated and unexpected effects of the green movement, and offer considerations on a path to a more sustainable future. It is important that these programs provide not only solutions, but also how you, the audience, can participate in creating a better future. And tonight's program, I think, is particularly timely, given that we were talking earlier before the program, that just last week the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change laid out stark choices and potential grim consequences for the human race in their latest report. In an article in yesterday's Washington Post, the report stated that to avoid heating the globe by the minimum possible, which was an average of 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the world's spiraling growth in greenhouse gas emissions must end no later than 2015, 7 short years from now. By 2050, it recommends that carbon dioxide and other atmospheric polluting gases be reduced by 50 to 85%. As the creation and maintenance of buildings in the United States contributes to over 40% of greenhouse gases domestically, this is an area that warrants our attention. But what is the best way to encourage green design? Is it government mandates, such as the one we have here in the district, that demands LEED certified buildings by 2012 to all buildings over 50,000 square feet? Or is the best way to offer incentives to builders and developers, such as tax incentives and shorter waits for permits? Or should we just let the market decide? If there's not a market for green building, will this movement last? Finally, what should governments be regulating in the first place? I look forward to a very interesting discussion that we're going to have tonight. And these discussions have been designed to incorporate your thoughts and comments as well. They were meant to be conversational in format. We are going to break periodically to take questions from the audience. And in an effort to get in as many questions and responses as possible, I'd ask you to be as brief as possible with your questions and comment. And we are going to be recording them, so please wait for a microphone to come up. At the end of the program, we encourage you to continue the conversation with both the participants that are up here on stage and those that are sitting next to you during informal refreshments in the museum center court. The one last thing, too, you might have found evaluations on your chair. That's another way that we encourage you to fill those out so we can hear from you about what you thought about tonight's program and other ideas for future programs in this series. If you like what you hear tonight and experience tonight, we invite you to our next program in the series entitled Living in a Disposable World on December 18th. As with the other programs in the series, we've invited speakers representing a diversity of professions and views to discuss the lifespans of the buildings we create, the products we consume, and the waste we throw away. We've assembled a really fantastic program, including landscape architect Julie Bargman, artist Chris Jordan, architect Tim Kraft, and the program will be moderated by Susan Schnazzi, the editor-in-chief of Metropolis Magazine. I would like to moment to thank our sponsors. The For the Greener Good series is presented by the museum's sustainability partner, the Home Depot Foundation, and we would like to thank them for their generous support of this innovative lecture series. Before we begin the program, can I get an idea of who is out there in the audience? It'll help the panelists to get an idea of who they're speaking to. Just by a show of hands, can you raise your hands if you're architects? Great. Planners? Engineers? Smattering of all these. Journalists? Legal scholars? Great. Students? Oh, that's great. Federal or state employees or municipal employees? That's wonderful. Who did I forget? Real estate investors? Developers? Developers? That's great. Healthcare? Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. As usual, the Building Museum brings such a wonderful array of professionals. So and retirees. Thank you very much. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator for this evening, who will in turn introduce our distinguished panel. Charles Linn is the deputy editor of Architectural Record and consulting editor of Green Source magazine. Charles graduated with a Bachelor of Architecture from Kansas State University in 1978 and practiced architecture until early 1986 when he became the founding editor of Architectural Lighting magazine. He joined Architectural Record in 1990 as its editor-at-large for the Northwest, as well as serving as editor of its Record Lighting publication. In 1993, he moved east to join the magazine as a managing senior editor. Since then, he has written and edited hundreds of articles on every aspect of building design, architectural technology, and firm management. In 2005, Charles became deputy editor of Record. In this role, he's helped lead the editorial development of Architectural Record's Innovation Conference and was instrumental in the launch of McGraw-Hill Construction's new Green Source magazine and website. Please welcome Charles Linn.
Thank you, Scott. Our program tonight is provocatively titled Going Green, Carrot, or Stick. Title seems to indicate that there is hopefully some hope that all of the goals that we have for green building, green design can be achieved voluntarily or perhaps just by virtue of market forces. There are several things that you can do for that. You can say a green building is more saleable. You can say that it's easier to lease. You could say a green building, if I do one, I'll get put into the fast lane of the permitting process. You could say, well, if I build one, I'll get a tax incentive, I'll get a break. There's all kinds of good reasons to do this. Now, before we go too much further with that, let's review just for a second the definition of sustainable. Sustainability, which we'll hear kicked around a lot tonight, is that the idea is that at the current rate of consumption, it is possible to maintain resource consumption at parity with our ability to renew it. Now, I want to just say that this is all very well and good. I want to read a little bit more from the latest UN report on climate change. Scott already gave you a few quotes from it. Observations from all continents and most oceans show that many natural systems are being affected by regional climate changes, particularly temperature increases. Most of the observed increase in globally average temperatures since the mid-19th century is likely due to observed increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations. There's high agreement and much evidence that even with current climate change mitigation policies and related sustainable development practices, global greenhouse gas emissions will continue to grow over the next few decades. Continued GHG emissions at or above current rates would cause further global warming and induce many changes in the global climate system during the 21st century that would likely be larger than those observed during the 21st century. Now, just to get us really bummed out, I want to just read some statistics from the Energy Information Administration. If you're not familiar with that, they're part of the Department of Energy. Anything that I'm reading here is available on their website. Now, this does not include homes, all right? This is just simply buildings, no residential. According to the EIA, there are 8.5 million buildings out there with a total square feet of 71.65 billion. 71.65 billion square feet. Now, according to McGraw-Hill Construction, whom I work for, we will be adding about 1 billion square feet to that this year. The energy use for this entire building, all of them added up, is about 6.523 quadrillion BTUs. Okay, now 1 quadrillion is 1,000 million BTUs. Now, 3.55% of that come from electricity. Electricity, which is the greatest source of CO2, and I get into some of those figures in just a second. To get that 3.55 quadrillion BTU, you actually have to make 10.7 quadrillion BTU because you lose about 2/3 of the electricity. So if you add all that up, just commercial buildings, institutional buildings, we're burning up about 13.7 quadrillion BTU annually. Now, that would be bad enough. There are 111 million households in the U.S. We grow by about 1 million households every year. And in 1986, we added 1.8 million units of housing. And that includes single-family residential as well as apartment buildings. We use about 92 million BTU per household. That, again, doesn't include electricity. And if you add electricity in, you're at 36 million BTU. After the inputs, that is how much electricity is made at the plant, you're up to 200 million BTU per household. Now, this doesn't include wood burning. Wood burning brings you up an average of 25 million BTUs per household, and burning wood is really worse than burning coal. So we're consuming about 22 quadrillion BTU annually for residential, and that's a lot. That's about 1.5 times what we can do for we consume for commercial and institutional buildings. So with that, we have quite a formidable challenge ahead of us, and the first person who will help us talk about that is Brian Gault. Brian, immediately to my right. Brian is the Director of Sustainable Building for the Peterson Companies, which is one of the largest privately held real estate developers in the Washington, D.C. area. In this capacity, he guides the company's green building and sustainability initiatives related to new and existing buildings, as well as helping guide overall company strategy. He's currently managing the LEED certification of over 1 million square feet of office space in Northern Virginia. He serves on the board of the U.S. Green Building National Council, Capital Regions Chapter, as well as the National Association of Industrial Office Properties Green Task Force. He holds a BA in International Studies from Middlebury College in Middlebury, Virginia, and is a candidate for an MBA from Johns Hopkins University. Jason Hartke, to Brian's left, right, sorry, is the U.S. Green Building Council's manager of state and local advocacy. He joined the U.S. Green Building Council last year to help build support for sound green building policy and increase awareness among state and local governments. Just prior to joining the council, Jason worked as a reporter with the Connection newspapers, receiving awards in both real estate reporting and feature writing. Before that, he served in the Clinton administration, working in the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, which acts as the president's liaison to state and local elected officials. He is a PhD candidate in public policy at George Mason University. He holds his master's degree in journalism and mass communication. Mark Palmer, who is at Jason's right, is the Municipal Green Building Program Manager for the Department of Environment of the City and County of San Francisco. He chairs their Municipal Green Building Task Force, developing the policies and codes needed to improve the environmental performance of city buildings. He directs a green building training program for city employees, and he oversees multiple projects in design and construction to ensure compliance with the city's LEED Silver standard adopted in 2004. He has 2 engineering degrees, postgraduate training in green building design, renewable energy construction management, and electric utility governance, and has directed environmental design for a major home builder, established renewable energy portfolios for utility companies, and founded an innovative green building consultancy. John Dernbach is professor of law at Widener's Harrisburg campus, teaching environmental law, administrative law, property, international law, international environmental law, sustainability and the law, and climate change. His research concentrates on environmental law, climate change, and sustainable development. He is chair of the American Bar Association's Energy, Environment, and Resources Section's Committee on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. He is also a member of the World Conservation Union's Commission on Environmental Law and the Roundtable on Science and Technology for Sustainability of the National Academy of Sciences. He received his BS from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire in 1975 and a JD from the University of Michigan. Welcome our panelists, please. Before we just sort of launch into all the questions, I want to give each of the panelists just a little bit of a moment or two to talk to us about sort of what their job descriptions are and what they do and what's on their mind sort of currently in terms of environmental building practices. And I'll start with Brian.
I'm the Director of Sustainable Development at the Peterson Companies, and really that's just a fancy name for somebody that just works on sustainability initiatives within the company. We recently made a commitment within the company to environmental initiatives. We think green building is here to stay. We think sustainability is a really important issue that we need to start focusing on. So what that translates into for me is figuring out the best way to incorporate these ideas into our projects. So the most obvious way is, for us, we're a real estate development company, is the LEED certification process. So I've been working on that for a number of buildings. And then we've started using the EPA's Energy Star program for some of our existing buildings. And then also what I do is just look at these strategies and figure out the easiest way to incorporate these strategies into a lot of our different projects, even if we're not pursuing LEED or Energy Star. I'm also working on just an overall corporate responsibility program for the company. So it's a pretty broad position. It's a new position for us, but it's a lot of fun.
Jason.
As mentioned, my name is Jason Hartke. I'm with the U.S. Green Building Council. For those of you who don't know, we're the folks who developed and administered the LEED Green Building Rating System, the nationally recognized benchmark for green building. USGBC is a nonprofit, mission-driven organization. We're membership-based. At this point, we represent more than 12,400 member organizations across the country. When I came on board in October of last year, that number was around 6,500, I believe, if I remember correctly. So again, we're seeing amazing growth on that front. That really does represent the activity that we see both on the public sector side and the private sector side. As you can imagine, our mission is focused around the stewardship of market transformation to green, high-performance buildings. We promote buildings that are environmentally responsible, economically profitable, healthy, productive places to live and work and play. In my capacity as manager of state and local advocacy, I work very closely with our 70-plus chapters across the country at really on the ground level to promote sound, like Charles said, sound and effective green building policy. And that can vary from state to state and from locality to locality. These policies are not so much prescriptive on our end as they are a dialogue with localities and states. I just want to back up. Charles gave a whole slew stats there. I just want to give you just two figures here. First off, in the context of climate change, the first thing we need to understand is that buildings represent 40% of our carbon emissions. That's bigger than any other sector. So transportation and industry, roughly 30% each, buildings 40%. So they're going to be a huge part of the challenge, and in our determined view, they're going to be as big a part of the solution. So we see it as an opportunity. And then second, in most large cities, again, this is just a point of context here. In most large cities, 75% of the waste that they're throwing into their landfills comes from buildings. So as we tear down our buildings, as we build new buildings, that waste is going into our local landfills. And again, we see this as an opportunity. There's proven, measurable results that LEED is producing. It's got a proven track record at this point. And then my only last point is on the greener good side, the focus of this talk, carrot or stick, don't go home just yet. The answer is both. But
good.
I'll elaborate.
Good. Mark, you've got an incredibly interesting job, I'm sure, being out in San Francisco. You get to see all sides of it, and it must be inspiring and really fun to be out there where, you know, it's almost the cradle of the whole movement.
Well, I really enjoy my job. I work in San Francisco's Department of the Environment, and we are somewhat unique among municipalities that we actually have a Department of the Environment. We did that by combining forces from other departments that have certain environmental functions and brought them all under one roof, and it seems to work very well. We have 65 professional environmentalists that work all together on issues of the city's recycling efforts, energy planning, environmental justice, toxics reduction, school education and outreach, and urban forestry and green building. I do three main things in a broad way of speaking. One is policy development. I helped write and implement the LEED Silver Ordinance that for all our municipal facilities that was adopted in 2004. Secondly, I do a lot of training, education, and outreach to city design professionals and the public. And thirdly, we offer technical assistance to design teams and make sure that they have the right consultants on board and the right amount of funding dedicated in the right ways in order to allow us to create more and better green and high performance buildings. You know, as we're facing this carbon focus of our culture, it's becoming very apparent to everybody now that the big contribution that buildings play to the negative environmental impacts. Buildings roughly contribute about 40% of all the pollution, all the carbon, and we have a moral and a global responsibility as building owners and designers and operators to really start making a change in the way we're doing business. And I would concur that it is both requirements and incentives, but I would like to add a third leg to that stool, and I think a very important one, and that's education. And I don't know if that comes under incentives or requirements, or maybe it's part of both, but I think the educational aspects of green building are less understood than they need to be, and that when you start drilling down into what really is green building about, it's not a collection of technologies that you add onto a conventional building. It's really about a different way of doing business. It's a project delivery method. It's a process where you get smart, engaged, experienced people in the same room to solve problems that can't be solved in the old linear way of doing design, architecture, engineering, construction, etc. So we're trying to forge that integrated design process and really make a better world. So thank you very much.
Professor Dernbach, John. I want to say a little thing about John. I didn't read this before. He co-authored an amicus brief to the United States Supreme Court's case, Massachusetts versus the EPA. His brief argued that the Environmental Protection Agency had mischaracterized or misrepresented the relevant science in deciding not to regulate greenhouse gases The Massachusetts won this case on April 2nd, and this is a fabulous thing because it's paving the way for all sorts of court challenges, I think, and congratulations on that. The majority opinion reflects the science that was described in John's brief, and I think it's a great step forward for us, John. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Well, sure. Thank you so much. Just a quick observation on the brief. I was part of a legal team that was comprised of 3 other lawyers, actually law professors, and we represented 18 prominent climate scientists, 2 that had won Nobel Prizes, Jim Hansen from NASA, and 9 individuals who are members of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering. And we were all actually very, very pleased at the outcome in that case. And what has happened since that case was decided now, there have been 2 more court decisions, one in a federal district court in Vermont some weeks ago, and then one in the Ninth Circuit last Thursday or Friday. And what you see happening now is the courts pushing the government and to some extent the private sector to do more than had been done. I've spent about half of my career working at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, now called the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Worked in the coal mining program for a while, helped draft Pennsylvania's mandatory recycling law, and spent a couple of years as a policy director at DEP. And so I pretty much split my career between working in state government and working in an academic setting. What happens with respect to the academic setting is, I guess the most obvious thing to say is that I teach. And what I'm seeing is an uptick of interest among my students and the students at our school and students elsewhere, actually a lot of younger people in environmental and sustainability issues. And I think a lot of it is crystallizing around the question of climate change. In terms of the writing that I've done, I've been sort of focusing on 2 questions. One is energy consumption is kind of a simple way of thinking about how to deal with the question of greenhouse gas emissions, and I've become convinced that we probably have the legal tools and technology at our disposal to flatten the growth of energy consumption and to push energy consumption down even within the next decade or so. And I'm pretty convinced that that's probably the most simple, basic, symbolic, understandable, and important thing, all of those together, that we could do. And some of my thinking on that really wraps around the question of buildings. When we talk about energy use from buildings, you can basically divide the question into 2 parts. One is new buildings. Now think about this. Take the numbers that Charles was describing for you and think about it in these terms. In the next 25 or so years, the population of the United States is going to increase by about 100 million people. We increase by about 30 million every decade. So within the next 25, 30 years, the U.S. population is going to increase by about 100 million. Think about how many homes, and commercial buildings, apartments, and all of the rest are going to be involved with that. And a lot of the green building discussion that we have is really wrapped around, well, how can we reduce the energy consumption from all of these new buildings? That's an important question, but it's only one question. The other question is, what do we do about all the existing buildings that are out there? The homes that we live in, the places where we go to work and go to school, and what can we do about reducing energy consumption in those buildings? Great many of them are very, very poorly insulated. A lot of them have furnaces, for example, that go back 30, 40, and 50 years. And what do we do about those? And I think there's a huge opportunity there that isn't talked about as much as it might be, and I think some of the folks on the panel tonight have some thoughts on that. The last thing I'll say is that I got interested in the green building issue because there was a green building that the Department of Environmental Protection built under former Governor Ridge in Pennsylvania. And at my church, we were looking at that green building project, which was very widely advertised, and we were looking at moving our school, St. Stephen's School. It's a community school that the Episcopal Cathedral in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania runs. And we were thinking about moving that school into an old parking garage, so old a parking garage that it doesn't have ramps, it had an elevator. And what we did is we built that structure green. We were the first church in the country to register a green building project with LEED. And what we're finding now, a couple of years into the project, is that we've saved about 30% of the energy that we might otherwise have spent, and that we've been able to pay that back in the last 3 to 5 years. Now, those are interesting numbers, but there's a larger kind of question, and that is, what should people with a faith perspective or an ethical or moral perspective be doing about this question? And I'm hoping that perhaps we can have a little bit of a conversation about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Brian, I'm going to start with you. Since you're in the developer side and you probably know to the nickel how much money it costs to make a building and how much you can rent it for, do you find at this point, and let's just get right down into the market-driven stuff, and I know Jason has some thoughts about this too. Do you find that there's an extra cost to green building? I mean, this is like the question on everyone's lips. If you're for it, you say it doesn't cost anymore, and if you don't want to do it, you have to say, oh, we can't afford it. So what have you learned at the Peterson Companies?
That's a good question. And I've actually heard Rick Fedrizzi, CEO of the U.S. Green Building Council, say that it doesn't cost more. And I've heard like a senior vice president at Turner say that it doesn't cost more. They're a contractor. And it's funny, a lot of times in the office, somebody will come in and say, hey, Brian, how much do we need to spend to do a LEEDs building? Which is funny because it's not LEEDs, it's LEED.
LEED isn't plural just yet.
Yeah.
So the first thing I say is, no, it's not LEEDs, it's LEED. Second thing I say is it really depends. It depends on what your baseline building program is that you're comparing against. So if you're doing a really sophisticated building already, it's going to be very small incremental cost to do it to make it green. But if you're doing a really cheap building, obviously it's going to be a lot more expensive to make it green. Second thing is how experienced your design and your construction team is. If you're working with an architect that's done it a lot, I know Davis Carter Scott out of Alexandria says they can design a LEED silver building for no cost premium. And the third thing is at what point in the process you decide to make your building green. If you're doing it up front, if you're setting your goals up front, it's a lot easier to integrate these ideas into your building project. But when it comes down to it at the end of the day, we still find that it costs more. That's the initial cost. That's not taking into consideration any payback or anything. I think it's worth it. The LEED certification process is definitely worth it. It costs a little bit more, but I think that you get better value in the end of the day.
Yeah, Tracy.
Can I just chime in on that one? Brian's absolutely right. The studies are consistent. It does cost more. According to the studies, because I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on it, but according to the studies, it's a 2% on average premium to build green. And according to those same studies, that premium is often paid back between the first 12 and 24 months in terms of the building's operations because of those life cycle cost savings. And then to boot, and this is really the financial kicker, on average, according to the studies again, the return on investment compared to that green premium is often returned at a scale of 10 times, often more. And I just want to correct one thing on the Rick Fedrizzi quote there. The line is that we're finding more and more in terms of anecdotal evidence that it doesn't have to cost additional. And we're seeing that in certain cases. Harvard University is a great example. They have gotten so good at it, and they've gotten, lo and behold, efficient at building green and doing exactly what Mark talked about and bringing all the stakeholders together at the offset and building green dormitories, building green office buildings for the university at no additional cost. Now that is not the norm. The norm is the average is about a 2% increase.
Mark.
If I might,
yeah.
I believe the study that Jason's referring to is the CAT study that
Correct.
Was done in 2003 and has been updated here very shortly. And that's the most widely quoted study there is. There are a couple more that are out there. One just published and republished by Davis Langdon, a national cost estimating firm, that actually shows no correlation between cost per square foot and the level of green. And basically their conclusion is that you can build a very expensive green building, or you can build a green building on a conventional budget. You can build a conventional building very expensively or on a baseline budget. And it really depends on the goals you set and how early in the process you set them. As Brian said, you really need to, it's a front-loaded design. And when we're talking about construction costs, I have to give the caveat that there probably are some additional design costs that are incurred. It takes more communication and more consultants and more networking and integrated process on the front end of a project. But the overall result is that project is going to be coming in very close to a conventional budget if you start early in the process and if you set your goals and you get buy-in from all the participants and stakeholders.
Yes, John.
Yeah, if I can just explain briefly how it works, because when we approached this as a church, we weren't approaching this problem as with a big checkbook. And what we found out really early on is that if you have the kind of integrated design that Mark was talking about, the people who build the shell of the building are talking to the people who design the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system in the building. And so if you have you design a building that is really, really, really well insulated, both in terms of the walls and the windows, you don't need as big or as powerful or as expensive a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. And the point is that green building is not simply a series of things that you add on to the cost of that you would otherwise incur. It's also a way of peeling off costs. And it's impressive, actually, that the additional cost is only 2%.
I think a couple of us up here are old enough to remember the solar generation, the old days, the way things were back in after the first energy crisis. There was tax programs that allowed people to put solar collectors on their homes and so on. And much to our chagrin, at least in my case personally, this enthusiasm sort of went away after a few years. I think, Mark, can you tell us what you think is different this time? I think Jason probably has something to say about this as well. Why is the movement getting traction now?
Well, you're right, it is different now than it was the first time around. I was a solar contractor in the 70s, so I remember what it was like. And I was telling somebody the other day that it's been a long, hard slog for 30 years, and now the phone won't stop ringing. So yeah, things are different, and it's very much of a grassroots support. We're not seeing a lot of action at the federal level to support us, but we certainly are seeing municipalities and state governments taking up the torch and leading the way with green building. Until just recently, the municipal efforts in green building have far outshone the private sector. In fact, membership-wise in the U.S. Green Building Council, municipalities and other governments represent about 4% of the membership, but represented about close to half of the projects being initiated throughout the country. And now that Lead for Homes has come online, that percentage has dwindled somewhat, obviously, because we have such a number of homes that are becoming LEED rated. But I think the whole emphasis on carbon now, and we're seeing the tremendous opportunities that good building design gives us to reduce our carbon footprint, is really the basis behind the energy behind green building right now. We're just seeing it coming from all sectors, and it's not just office buildings, but it's schools, it's churches, it's apartment buildings and residences. Every building type across the board is getting involved, and it's very heartening for me, who's been in this business for a long time, to see that finally I've got some friends that are getting on the bandwagon.
Jason, you're sort of in the eye of the storm there at the USGBC. I mean, I think that we were talking earlier in the evening, 13,000 people came to the Green Build the year before last. This year it was 22,000, if I'm not mistaken. Wow, it's just taking you all by storm, isn't it?
Yeah, our chairman, Sandy Wiggins, calls it a green tsunami that's taking over, and there's all sorts of. I think the best phrase on this is Gladwell's tipping point. I mean, we are seeing the tipping point, and for so many years, like Mark mentioned, we were going up the roller coaster, click, 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 and we're starting to look down and move a lot faster, and I think that's obviously I'm very pleased with that. All the trend lines, the ones that we want to see go up, are really going. The growth trends are straight up. We've seen that in our conference numbers. We've seen that in our membership, but we've really seen it in the projects that are being built. And again, just going back to Mark's comment, it really is a credit to the early adopters at the state and local level. And we are seeing the stars align, but a lot of that has been a groundswell from the local level up. I mean, right now you've got 710 plus mayors across the country that have signed the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which is a commitment to the Kyoto Protocol reduction of 7% in GHG compared to the 1990 levels. And in fact, I guess Mayor Nichols of Seattle is the only one that I know of who has actually determined that they've met that mark. And he was also the one who called for the challenge. So anyway, we've seen an amazing amount of growth in projects. On the commercial side, we've got over 1,100 certified projects, and this is the big number. We've got over 8,000 projects in the pipeline as registered projects. Mm-hmm. In terms of local government projects, just so you know, there's about 300 million square feet of space, local government projects, that are either certified or registered. And that just gives to show you the amount of commitment that the local governments have had to green building. And it's, going back to green build here for 1 second, Mayor Hartwell said it creates a culture of green building, of sustainability at the community level. And that's what those policies really have done. Every project that goes up that's a local government project is a demonstration to the private sector that this works, that it works for the environment, and it makes sense financially. And in that regard, you have seen a lot of uptake on the private sector side.
Now, I'm not terribly familiar with the legislation that has come online in some places to require LEED certification for some kinds of buildings. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick synopsis. On the federal side, there's 12 federal agencies or departments that have adopted LEED for their building construction, including GSA, which is the largest landlord in the nation. On the state side, there's been 26 states that have passed various forms of green building policies using LEED, and on the local level, there's over 110 policies. Now, the policies, obviously, there's some variability. On the local level, there's 80-plus jurisdictions that require that their municipal buildings be constructed using LEED. Then there's about, I'd say, 3 or 4 dozen incentive-based policies, and now you've got about a dozen localities that have adopted LEED, requiring LEED for the private sector, places like Boston, Washington, D.C., Pasadena, and the latest is Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So there really has been a variety of policy. The incentives, quite frankly, has been where the most creativity and innovation has occurred, because they're creating different types of policies month in and month out. So it's really a neat place to be. And they're really trying to, as much as they've led by example these localities, they're really trying to change behavior in the private sector.
Mm-hmm. Mark, do you find that to be true in San Francisco? How are you trying, how's your government trying to push the silver requirement that you have in your own buildings out into the private sector. Is there a movement to do that? How are you finding that sort of, can you gain traction?
Yes, we do have a number of initiatives, and it all kind of started with our climate action plan, and this was written as a compound project among several different city departments, and it started with an inventory of what our carbon emissions are, and as a non-industrial city, we're kind of split half and half between buildings and transportation as our carbon footprint. So we even have a bigger percentage in buildings than most places do. So it starts with the kind of the benchmarking of where do you start and then where do you go from here. And we adopted the LEED Silver municipal standard in 2004, as I mentioned earlier. And this is not just a standard that just affects the city government, but as Jason said, this is kind of a stating of the municipal philosophy, and it tells the private sector what the city's up to, and if they can read the writing on the wall, they'll probably realize that this is going to be something that's going to apply to them one way or another in the future. So it is very important at kind of setting the tone in your particular locality. So based on those two things, we are now working with the private sector in a number of ways. We've started a LEED Gold priority permit process. I always have a hard time saying that, in which any private sector project that is striving for LEED Gold, and there's some significant hooks involved with that, will get moved to the front of the line in the planning department, the building department, and our Department of Public Works for street permitting. Now, in some municipalities, that might not be too big of an incentive, but we have such a backlog in San Francisco, it oftentimes takes 8 to 9 or 10 months to get assigned a planner for an environmental review in the planning department, and we're guaranteeing that you get assigned a planner within 2 weeks. And we're seeing developers saying, LEED Gold, no problem, get me to the front of the line. This represents potentially millions of dollars of savings in land acquisition costs, debt service reduction, holding costs, and other developmental costs that are acute in the building industry. And we're seeing this being taken up very quickly. We have a dozen projects totaling well over 2 million square feet now in the priority pipeline since this was announced about 8 months ago. And we figured we might have 10 in the first year, so we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's a good problem to have. And our only challenge now is devoting the staff in the planning department to the priority line and having enough people to keep that one moving as to the promises that we're making them. We offer a number of other incentives in terms of a streamlined solar permitting that right now, instead of costing over $1,000, we reduced it to $79, and it's an over-the-counter permit. So you go in, you pay your $79, you get your permit if your solar system fits within certain guidelines. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people that way. And then as a municipality, we've developed a number of tools that aid designers and owners in being able to implement these policies. And I could go into great length into some of these tools, and I believe we're going to be able to make the URL, the web links available after this program so that you could see where these policies and where these tools actually come from.
I want to go out to the audience now and see if anybody here has a question for the panel. If you do, raise your hand and I'll call on you. We want to, all we ask is that you wait for the microphone before you speak. I see a fellow there in the back, way in the back, was the first one I saw.
Yeah, you talked about for new buildings about a 2% premium above the construction cost. What about for existing building, major retrofits, renovations?
Mark, you may have some comments on this too. I have not seen financial data specific to the existing buildings. I know it varies. I just want to make a quick comment on existing buildings because the kind of the vogue thing to do is concentrate on new construction. It makes sense for localities. It makes sense for companies and even with large portfolios because they know that they have the capital budget, and to increase that capital budget by 2% at the beginning is a little easier than going back and addressing their existing building stock. You know, you've had a lot of policies, not a lot, I'd say you've had more and more policies addressing the existing buildings front. You've had Governor Schwarzenegger pass a executive order to get all their existing building stock into the LEED EB program, the LEED Existing Buildings program. Governor Chris basically signed the exact same type of executive order. You've had a couple localities try to do the same thing. The biggest barrier, of course, is the upfront financial cost, because, you know, when you're talking about the state of California and all their existing buildings, it would be a lot of money up front. So they've gone into it incrementally. They've kind of done an analysis on which ones they should target first, which ones are going to have the biggest return on investment, and have started to get slowly but surely get as much of the existing building stock into the program. There's also, and I know we may talk about it more later, but I did just want to mention briefly, there is, so anyway, I just want to make sure also that this is a big opportunity for localities and states to start to address their existing building stock. There's no question about it. We've worked with the Clinton Climate Initiative and others to try to come up with more financial mechanisms that make sense to address the existing building stock. And the ESCO model and the performance contracting model, we think, makes a lot of sense. It's not it's one of many options that are out there. And I think the Clinton Climate Initiative is doing a great job with working with cities to make that model more accessible, to facilitate the use of that model, because there are some obstacles just in terms of organization and logistics. But you know, what they're coming to the table with on the CCI when they work with cities is, first off, no upfront costs to the city, 0, and savings in year 1. So that makes obviously a big difference to localities, and it could potentially make a big difference to states. I mean, the larger the scale, the better the model works.
Yeah, and I think that it's really hard, or very, very difficult to say whether it costs more or costs less, because it just whether it costs more to do a green retrofit or not, it just all depends on what you have to do. You know, whether it means insulation or whether it means a complete a heating plant retrofit.
Can I make one other quick comment?
Yeah.
The case studies on that front are California's EPA building and the 2 Adobe towers, I believe in San Jose. Both were LEED EB Platinum projects. And the financials on those 3 case studies, they blow you away. But again, that's anecdotal evidence.
What were you going to say there, John?
Well, the thing I was going to add is again, this is sort of our experience. It's sort of interesting, the church as a builder, but I'll say it anyway, is that as we learned about LEED, what we saw is that there's not just one shade of green. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. There are a lot of different characteristics of a green building, and as a builder or a developer or a financer or whatever role you happen to play, you can pick a certain kind of insulation at a certain level and at a certain cost, as opposed to perhaps a more expensive kind of insulation that might not get as much back financially as quickly. And there are lots and lots of choices. And so the question about costs, in my view, is usefully informed by an understanding that you can calibrate this based on the sort of the wide range of choices that are available. You're not sort of like picking up the green building model on a take it or leave it basis. And in fact, the LEED gradation, if you will, from silver to gold to platinum reflects that.
Brian is actually the only person who actually has a checkbook.
Well, we've looked at the LEED for Existing Buildings program, and really it's tough because it's not like there's a percentage increase for LEED for existing buildings, or to do a LEED for existing building, because it's like, what are you comparing it against? Energy is probably the biggest thing in LEED for existing buildings. You have to have a certain Energy Star score even to be eligible for the program. And beyond that, it's a lot of just like policy, like low impact cleaning stuff and recycling, and what kind of materials you're purchasing in the building. So that stuff doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. It's really getting that Energy Star score. So obviously if you're dealing with a building that was built in the 80s, you need to upgrade the systems completely to reach that 69 or whatever it is. That's a big deal. But if all you need to do is change the light bulbs, then that's a different story. Transwestern has done a lot with it. They have a lot of buildings. So
Let's
at
take
that.
another
CV Richard
question.
Ellis just
Sorry.
committed that they were going to use the LEED EV program for 100 of their buildings in their portfolio. So it's getting there's uptake in the market because it does make sense. And just on that point, the Adobe case study, they go through just about every credit, and obviously the energy credits have a very direct return on investment. But some of these other credits that you wouldn't think of having a return on investment do. So I would recommend taking a look at those studies. They're really well done.
Yes.
Hi. I do commercial real estate investing and renovate existing buildings. And my personal experience in trying to do the right thing was that the difference in cost was not 2%, but the difference to do a green building was 20%.
Wow.
And it was, frankly, cost prohibitive. When it's coming out of our pockets, my partner's pockets, 20% is a big deal. And
could you give us your sort of scope of work? What does that entail, that 20%? And is that an existing building that you're bringing up to a certain standard?
We took a completely dilapidated 1922 apartment building.
Excellent
and
example.
did a condo conversion.
Uh-huh.
And we needed to sell those units at market.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did it according to the green standards and were politically correct, which we wanted to do, it was going to cost the partners 20% more, and that's coming right out of the profit. And I'm being realistic. We would love to be idealistic,
Sure.
but this was real.
Sure.
My question, so I'm just mentioning that, but my question is that what I've heard in municipalities is that there's a great resistance from the public utility companies, the PEPCOs of the world, of the country. They're very resistant to this. It's not in their best interest to reduce.
Yes, in fact, I believe it's Connecticut and Massachusetts, there's legislation proposed to decouple profit from income for the utility companies, because at the moment, energy conservation hurts their profitability.
Exactly.
And so there needs to be that's sort of an issue that's beyond our scope of work. Speaking of scope of work here, but you're absolutely right that it's a huge issue for utility companies. Absolutely. Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Can we respond to this?
Yeah.
The idea that there's a 20% incremental cost to build green in that certain situation is possible, especially if you have an existing building and you're trying to convert it into, let's say, apartments. The idea, and I think Mark said this probably the most eloquently, that if you do green building as add-ons, it can get extremely expensive, especially if the building's already constructed. So if you're doing a major renovation and it's going to be an additional renovation, then you can get the same cost efficiencies. To do add-on green does get expensive.
Are there any trends in the market that make it more economically viable?
I'm going to comment on a couple things. Two, in terms of the utility comment, the utilities, and I've heard this case made by both the utilities and kind of the power plant, assume that it's close to being accurate, but the idea that the utilities have to build a new power plant, that costs more up front than having them have customers be more energy efficient. So
demand side management.
So there really is an incentive for them to provide more support for energy efficiency. That's the argument that I've heard. So I'm definitely not the expert on the science behind that argument, but there has been made that case by kind of both sides of the argument, both the utilities and the folks who are kind of the watchdog groups. And the third, there's incentives for LEED out there, but there's incentives for energy efficiency, renewable energy, really, I mean, just a list that you wouldn't be able to imagine. And I would recommend that everybody here who's interested in getting a better perspective on how many of these incentives exist, the proliferation of these incentives, go to the Desire USA website. It's DSIREUSA.org, and it lists renewable energy and energy efficiency incentives state by state, and most of those incentives, as you go through the list, are from the utilities. I mean, it really is staggering how many incentives are being put forth by utilities. And the cities that own their their utilities, boy, they do a lot of creative things to incentivize energy efficiency.
If I could add, there is a major learning curve to get into green building, to do it properly, and it doesn't come like falling off a log just to everybody. It takes an experienced team, and if you're experiencing costs of 20, I'm not going to point fingers at your project, but that sounds like a high premium to me. And when I hear the CEO of Turner Construction, a major international construction company, saying that green building used to be a value-added proposition, but now it's just game stakes. It's just what it takes to get in the game. It's a competitive world out there, and there are consultants and architects and engineers all around the world now who are doing this as business as usual without adding a premium. So the other quote from the head of Turner is that this is the end of the beginning. So we're kind of at the end of the learning stage for a lot of people now. We're at the beginning of the true green building experience where everybody's getting on board.
This young lady right here.
I was really excited to hear Mark was going to be here from San Francisco, because I've heard a lot about what San Francisco's doing. Environment. And my question to Mark is, I tend to agree with what this lady said from the experience. We've just spent 6 months talking about energy policy in New Orleans, and without some significant subsidies, it's just not going to happen, subsidies and incentives. So for the poor localities, for the states that are not California, can you tell me a little bit more about your sticks? And particularly, I heard that there was an ordinance that requires homeowners to, when they're selling their homes, to tell the prospective purchaser about the utility usage or the energy usage. And the follow-up question to John is, can you talk about the technologies that will reduce consumption and help some of these less affluent states and localities?
Well, thank you for the question. That's very important. And I'm not sure I can give you the answer you're looking for Louisiana and Mississippi exactly. But one of the projects we're very proud of in San Francisco is a new affordable transitional housing project. It's 106 units that just was awarded the LEED Silver plaque. It came in under budget and on time, and it's a wonderful single room occupancy hotel for formerly homeless people that our San Francisco redevelopment agency decided they were going to try this as their first foray into LEED, and they've been very gratified that they did, because the living experience is better, the indoor air quality is really superior. The energy bills are minuscule, and this is heavily subsidized. I mean, the residents hardly pay anything for rent at all. And you mentioned the ordinance. We do have what's called a residential energy conservation ordinance and also a commercial energy conservation ordinance, both of which are in the process of being revamped and made a little bit more robust. It does, among other things, require you to give the utility history to a prospective buyer, but it also, in its new version, will require a certain amount of upgrades to a house or a business upon the sale of that house or business, so that a certain amount of money is invested to increase the energy efficiency, water efficiency, and hopefully indoor air quality and other green building features of those buildings.
I want to ask.
If I can.
I'm sorry. I
had
forgot
a second part. Yeah.
I forgot. I'm sorry.
No worries. Just quickly, a lot of the technologies for existing buildings, commercial and residential, are really off-the-shelf technologies. There is, to give you an example, a couple of different utilities to foster demand-side management have been distributing kits in low-income areas that include water-saving shower heads and programmable thermostats, among other things. The total value or price of the equipment, if you will, in these kits is less than $100. And what a lot of utilities are seeing, at least some utilities are seeing, is that the payback that they're getting in terms of reduced energy use is actually better than $100 even in the first year. The federal government has a low-income weatherization program that I suppose is used a lot in northern areas. There's something like 12 million homes around the country that qualify for that, and a fairly small fraction of those homes are actually weatherized on an annual basis. And I guess what I'm saying is that there are, for existing structures, there's a lot of off-the-shelf technologies that are fairly cheap, that are fairly easy to get access to, and people who know the technologies way better than I do can talk to you about them. But it's really impressive to me when I looked at it, the extent to which those kinds of technologies are available. The payback periods for a lot of those technologies are very short, and yet they're not being used at nearly the extent that they could be if you were simply employing an economic analysis.
I wanted to shift back to the panel, just a couple of other questions. Jason and Mark, tell me about Standard 189. Standard 189, piece of building code. Tell us about that.
Sure. Want me to take first crack here?
Go ahead.
Okay. You can help me with some of the acronyms, maybe.
I was hoping you could help me.
Standard 189 is a partnership. It's a very great name for a standard, a green building standard that's being developed in partnership with USGBC, ASHRAE, and ISNA, which are the illuminating engineers. ASHRAE are the heating, refrigerating engineers, represent the heating, refrigerating engineers. And ASHRAE is in the business of producing standards. Probably the most well-known that you guys will be familiar with is 90.1, and every 3 years, 90.1 goes through a cycle of upgrade.
And these standards then get built into building codes.
Right. And Standard 189 was developed to be to help raise the floor for all buildings on the commercial side and the large residential side, large multi-story residential buildings as well. And it was actually, the process was, it took lead to some degree and said, okay, where are we in terms of what projects are meeting the lead criteria, the credits, and they switched. Lead is based on, incentives. So you get a credit, you get a point for doing more energy efficiency. You get a credit or a point for doing more water efficiency. Well, it took those credits and it put it into a prescriptive code language. Now, the idea is that, yes, we've seen about a dozen localities take lead and say, we want to use that, the minimum lead certification as the baseline for what all commercial buildings need to do. So, for instance, you look at Washington, D.C., and they're using LEED as the tool for that regulatory action. Well, the idea was Standard 189 is going to be a much better regulatory tool for localities to raise the floor, to be the minimum standard for buildings on the commercial side. And we're excited about it. It's gone through its first draft and public comment period, and I believe it goes through one more, and it's supposed to be done by the first part of 2008. They're also going to take it through the ICC process, and if it goes through, it'll kind of go through the process and automatically get into the code of about 40% of our states and localities. But again, LEED, because it is incentive-based, speaking of carrot or stick, the idea that you would take LEED, and I mean we've seen this be problematic at the DC level in Pasadena, in Boston. Boston actually took specific credits and integrated into their zoning code. So to take something that's incentive-based and make it prescriptive is difficult, and we think Standard 189 is really going to fill that role much better than LEED is doing now.
Because now you have a regulation in the law.
Like I said, it's written for code.
Yeah.
It's prescriptive, and it can be inspected, and it can be a great baseline.
Yeah.
A green building baseline for
Mark,
for
what were you
buildings.
going to say?
Well, I work a lot with our building code officials, for better or for worse. Building codes, as you probably know, are designed to protect the health and safety and welfare of us. And they are designed to prevent the worst buildings from occurring. They also inadvertently prevent some of the best buildings from being built. And when we start trying to apply LEED to a building code, it's problematic because LEED has lots of options, and it's a menu-driven rating system where it gives designers many options on ways to achieve an ultimate score. And that kind of scenario doesn't work well for building codes. They like, in very prescriptive language, you must do this, this, and this, and you have to do it this way. And that's what Standard 189 is attempting to do, is trying to take the base level of LEED certification or thereabouts and codify that, put it into language that code officials actually understand and can implement.
Exactly.
John.
Just a quick thing on building codes and sort of the relationship between that and federal law. The Energy Policy Act of 1992 requires states on a regular basis to consider a building code, the newest version of a particular building code for residential buildings and another building code for commercial buildings. And I don't think those building codes are the same as you're describing. I think those codes are probably less energy efficient than the codes that you're describing here. But if you take even those codes and you look across the country and you say, well, okay, so how many states actually have in place building codes that meet the most energy efficient standards according to those codes? And it's about half the buildings, or excuse me, about half the states for residential, the residential building code, and about half the states, a little different mix of the states, for commercial building codes. And so by way of kind of a reality check on that, what we're talking about, if you look at performance and delivery of high levels of efficiency at buildings across the United States, there's actually quite a large variation. And if we're going to address the climate change issue in some effective way, we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that.
Can I add to that just briefly? Standard 90.1 is, like I said, it's an energy standard that ASHRAE puts out, and they've institutionalized it so it comes out every 3 years. Well, there are still states that have 90.1 1989 version in place. Then you have states like California that are way out in terms of leadership that have adopted their own Entitled 24, which may be the most aggressive, most rigorous energy standard in the country. And then there are quite a few that have the latest 90.1 version 2004. So these codes, these really are these are the regulatory tools that need to be the same across the land, and we need to make sure that every state that floor has been risen to these levels. I know that ASHRAE does a lot to try to advocate for 90.1, the latest version 2004, and in fact they're very close to coming out with 90.1 2007.
Brian.
Yeah, real quick. I don't know everything about Standard 189P. It's P, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Very
Whatever it
catchy
is.
marketing.
But what I like about it is that it seems like it covers everything that everybody should be doing without question, and it takes away the arduous or sometimes arduous LEED certification process where you have to be submitting all this documentation, going through that process takes a lot of time. Instead, it's just code. Everybody's doing it, no question. So I'm looking forward to it for that reason.
And LEED was always meant to be a leadership standard. It's continuously being updated and improved, and taking in the latest building science. So again, you know, LEED was meant for that upper 25% of the market, the risk takers, the innovators, and with the idea that those leaders would pull the rest of the market much faster.
The point that I was making with all these statistics when we first started, in particular that the Energy and Administration Agency, or Energy Information Administration, says that there are 71 billion square feet of existing buildings out there, not residential. We're adding about 1 billion new ones per year, billion square feet of new space per year. I don't know how many could possibly get through, would qualify for LEED. What it seems to me the real opportunity is, and John alluded to this earlier, is in new in existing construction. And this is where I sort of see the stick coming in. And I don't know how you do it. I mean, we heard already from a real estate person who said that she found a 20% cost premium. In fact, that was a person who was actually motivated to do something about an existing building. Most people who have an existing building sitting out there are fine with the way it is. How do we actually start to attack the existing building problem? And after that question, how do we actually begin to attack the residential problem? The residential problem being that residential buildings, or specifically single-family homes, are even more wasteful than commercial and institutional buildings, and there are a lot more of them. Anybody want to take a crack at that, John?
Well, there's some behavioral issues here that are important. It's most folks, or at least a lot of folks in their own homes, are going to replace their hot water heater when it fails, or their furnace when it fails, and often it's Sunday morning and it's 10 below zero or something, and equipment fails in your house at all the wrong times, and when you want it replaced, you want it replaced now. And I think that some part of this, at least the thinking that I've been doing, is that a lot of the contractors are folks who are not as knowledgeable about the most sophisticated and demonstrated green building technologies as they might be. And a lot of the things that you need to know in order to think about replacing your furnace, say, that might have been built in 1955, are not things that are right at the tip of your fingertips. If you ask, if I've done this, I ask my contractor, I say, or the folks that take care of my furnace, and I say, well, you know, what I would like to know is if this particular model of furnace that you're showing me, okay, how much more efficient is it than my current furnace? And wouldn't it be interesting if somebody designed, and maybe somebody in this audience has done this or knows of this, is some simple program where you could input 3 or 4 or 5 data bits and come up with an estimate, okay, of the payback period, for example, to replace your furnace with your furnace, which has a particular model, which was installed back whenever, and this is what your utility bills are, and this is how much energy you're using, and if you replace that, you hold your energy consumption, you hold the size of your house the same or something like that, and just plug in some numbers and you get a result. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that would tell you, that would actually answer the question, okay, how good a deal is it for me to replace my old furnace? And if there were simple calculating tools that were available, if a lot of the information that the U.S. Department of Energy posts on its website, which is terrific stuff, was information that a lot of the contractors understood better and that was distributed in a public way, in a more effective way. If the government worked together with the contractors and the equipment manufacturers and the builders and the developers and other folks by way of partnerships, so that lots and lots of education and learning could occur about what's actually available and what choices you can represent to homeowners, and how you can make those choices available to homeowners at the time they actually are making the decision, I think you get a lot better outcomes, and that's even before you get to the question of regulation.
I think what John was referring to is what we in the commercial building world called energy modeling. It's a very important part of the design process, and there are very sophisticated programs which help designers make those types of choices, and there are less sophisticated programs that are just very applicable for residential applications as well. And I wanted to bring this back to Standard 189 because I think that if that becomes adopted by local jurisdictions, that will set the floor for not just new construction but for renovations as well, so that when buildings are due to be renovated, they will have to meet certain minimum guidelines, and that should go a long way toward addressing that. And I'm glad to see some attention being paid to the existing building question. You know, new buildings are very sexy and alluring, but it's only a very small piece of the pie when we're talking about the big carbon footprint we have, and most of that is due to existing buildings. And you know, we really have an obligation to address our existing buildings and come up with a programmatic way of doing that. California has some very aggressive residential green building programs, as do other states and municipalities all across the country. LEED for Homes is coming online now, thousands of homes being registered and certified under LEED. There's a lot that can be done for existing buildings, but it's a little different challenge than with new construction, where you actually have a budget to work with, and you're just talking about maybe tweaking that budget a little bit. With an existing building, you have an operations and a maintenance budget, but that's kind of what you have to work with, and it's more challenging.
We just have time for just one or two more audience questions. Oh, well, we'll have lots to talk about after the program, I'm sure. This young lady right here.
This question is for any of the speakers, but you know, with the 700 mayors that have signed up for the 7% reduction and all of those kinds of things and all of this change, the mayors aren't simply thinking about new buildings or existing buildings. They're also thinking, I think, about development patterns. And so my question is, in the worlds that you're in, all 4 or 5 of you, do you see the green movement having any effect yet on development patterns? Basically, I'm talking about compact versus sprawl.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Go ahead, Mark.
LEED has another program, not to have the whole program on LEED, but LEED ND stands for Lead for Neighborhood Developments. And we have a couple of those going on in San Francisco right now. One being a redeveloped old industrial site, about 20 acres, that has just been accepted into the LEED ND pilot program. And another is about 7,000 new mixed-use residential and mixed-use development projects on the redevelopment of Treasure Island. And the developer in Treasure Island has agreed that the whole island will be a LEED for neighborhood developments development. And all the buildings developed on the island will be built to the LEED Gold standard. So this is proliferating and it is going out, and part of LEED for neighborhood developments is that it discourages sprawl, and if you're continuing to do sprawl, that really doesn't apply for LEED for neighborhood developments type of a rating.
And it really is a good question, because development is organic. It's not just one thing. I like to brag about this. I live in an apartment building in New York City. We have 92 families who live on 2 acres. There is a parking garage where there are only 28 cars in it, but that is only possible because we have a great public transportation system, you know, and so you can't just kick people out of their single-family homes unless you're going to give them a bus to ride or take away their cars or what have you.
Quick thing on LEED ND. As you mentioned, it takes the lens of focus from the building to the neighborhood scale, which is desperately needed, I think. The 2 categories that it really brings a lot of emphasis on are location, the sprawl idea, and density. And those are extremely important. Now, this was this is being developed in a partnership with NRDC and the Congress for New Urbanism, and all 3 partners agree that this is not the silver bullet for for planning. Smart planning, intelligent planning still needs to be done. Comprehensive plans, those are extremely important. And to the degree that we can influence smart planning, I think we need to do that. But Lead ND will be a tool to at least help us down that road and help at least guide maybe better decisions down the road.
Question right down front, please.
I only heard the word mentioned once, and I noticed 20% of our panelists brought some with them. I haven't heard water discussed, and I know in the West, water policies differ sharply from the East. Mm-hmm. We know the droughts have come and gone and are forecasted to increase in the future.
Although Atlanta is in the East.
Exactly, and the water rights and groundwater pollution all are energy intensive. Moving water is energy intensive. Talk briefly, if you would, or as much as you like, about the green future of water in these pillars of our society, as well as an urban sprawl where different water treatment systems are being used because they're not making it anymore and it's being recycled and we're all paying the price for it. As contrasted by gasoline, for example, that bottle of water is significantly more, and that's occurred
tap
recently.
Water.
Well, we have one panelist that brought a bottle with him because he didn't trust the tap water. But
anybody want to take a shot at that, John?
Just real quickly on the public policy intersection of water, we're seeing some, for municipalities or even incentives, sometimes when they'll take lead, they'll actually go through lead and go through the water efficiency credits. Like on the East Coast, they'll say you need to do more related to storm water management. So they'll actually pull that out and say you need to actually, if it was just an option, they would say this needs to be a prerequisite. On the West, they'll often take those same credits and say you need to do more on water efficiency. So there's some interesting public policies that are being created using LEED to address that issue. I think it's going to be an increasingly important issue, if not, one of the most critical civilization imperatives as climate change and all that, all the ramifications of climate change come to a head.
We're seeing a big emphasis on energy and carbon and that relationship. But I think that water is going to be the next big crisis on the horizon that's going to face us all. And a lot of people don't realize the carbon impacts that water and water pumping and storage and water delivery and wastewater treatment and pumping and storage, and it's significant. And there are obviously certain credits within LEED that give you points toward using water more efficiently. We're working on a lot of our code issues around water to try to, we just changed a law that used to require us to pump all roof drains into the sewer or pipe all roof drains into the sewer. Now we can disconnect that and use it for irrigation in our backyards. We're also trying to pioneer some gray water systems. We have a recycled water plan that's going into effect. We're working on trying to get waterless urinals permitted. We're doing a number of things in the water area, so it's very important.
Gray water is hugely important. I mean, we're flushing every day drinkable water. Think about that.
Yeah. John?
No, the only thing that I would add to what has already been said is to underscore something that we've perhaps all assumed but is worth saying, is that LEED is not just about energy. LEED's about a whole bunch of things. When we talk about a green building, it's about using floor tiles that are made of non-toxic and recyclable material. It's about using wood that comes from sustainably harvested forests. It's about urinals you don't have to flush, and the energy piece of it. And what's interesting about LEED is that from the standpoint of law and buildings, a lot of the work that's been done that is relevant here is about energy. And the Energy Policy Act that I described earlier is really about energy. But LEED asks a broader set of questions and a powerful and important set of questions. And while you see mayors and governors adopting requirements that when you see mayors and governors adopting requirements that LEED be done in public buildings or in school buildings, what you're seeing is that the conversation moving from a conversation that is simply about energy to a conversation that is more broadly about the environmental impacts of the buildings. And I think that I think is probably underneath your question.
We're about 5 minutes over, and so what I'd like for us to do is have each of the panelists give us about 30 seconds on what you think an individual can do to make a difference. John.
Reduce your energy use every single year from the use that you had before at your place of business, at your school, wherever it is that you work or worship or spend any time at all. Find a way to get them to reduce energy use. It's the simplest. Carbon footprinting is good, but it's a little bit complicated. Just reduce your energy use every single year.
Mark.
ICLEI is the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, and they have a list on their website of the 50 things you can do to stop or slow down climate change or global warming. And they're all almost no cost or low cost items. And if you take a look at that list, it'd be a great way to start. The second thing would be to call your representatives and congresspeople and tell them that you think green building is very important to national security, energy independence, climate change. It addresses all of the social ills that we face today, in my opinion. So get on the phone.
Yeah, I'm a little biased here, but I would say get involved locally. Get involved in these advocacy efforts that are really springing up all across the nation. You can do that through the USGBC chapters. You can do that through the Sierra Club chapters across the country. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. Our local officials are way more accessible than you would ever imagine. All the green building policies that I've been involved with, that USGBC has seen passed, almost uniformly derive from conversations with our chapter members and policymakers. They're receptive, they understand the issues, and I just think that if you get involved, you can make a big difference right away.
Right.
Change your light bulbs. I'm just kidding. You hear that a lot. Kind of get tired of hearing that. It's an important thing to do, but really I think the most important thing to do is become involved on a political level. Just let your leaders know that it's important to you, these issues, because I don't think that anything's really going to happen until our political leaders start doing something about it.
Thank you very much for being here and for your attention, and please thank our panel.
Thank you.